Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to Amazing Coding. I'm Ahmad, and in today's video, we're going to discuss the input elements. And just a brief definition of what the input element does is it provides the user with a place where they can input data, and then me and you in our website, we can read that data and do something with it. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. And in our HTML file, inside the body, we're going to put the input tag. And then immediately you see what the input tag looks like, right? It's just like the image where it only needs the opening tag, not the opening and closing, like 95% of the HTML elements that we took before. And then second, we have this type property. And what the type property does is it tells us what type of data the user is giving us, right? So in this case, we're saying, hey, provide the user with the text input, meaning I want the user to give me text, and then I can read that data and do whatever I want with it. So let's just save and open up the file just to see what we're talking about. So we see what the input of type text does is it gives the user a box where they can give us whatever text that they want, right? So that's what the input text box element does for us. So what we're going to do is we're going to make like this little form or this little questionnaire for the user where we're asking for their first name, right? So, and then if we save and refresh, we see that it now says first name and the user can put their first name here. But also we're going to do a couple of other things. We want to ask them for their last name, right? And put an input for that. And then finally, we want to ask them for their favorite food. And we want to give them an input for that. So now we have three different inputs, each one looking and asking for a different bit of data. So now we need a way to, of course, separate these inputs from each other, right? Because we have to identify each one as a different type of input. So we're going to do that by giving them an ID, right? And what we discussed what an ID does is it makes something unique and we can reference that ID later. So for this one, I'm going to give it the ID of first name. For the second one, I'm going to give it the ID of last name. And again, the IDs can be anything that you want. And then finally, the ID for the last one is going to be called fave food, right? So now I have a way for me to say, hey, this box is for the first name, and I have a way of knowing that this box is first name because now I gave it an ID, and I did the same thing for the other two boxes. Now I need to add a button, right? Because now someone has to press like submit form or submit answers or something. So I'm going to put submit data, and I'm going to save. So now we see what our questionnaire or our form looks like. Three different inputs and one button to submit the data. So now what we need to do is create a JavaScript function to read the values of what was inside the input, right? Because right now, the value of this first box is nothing. But if I was to put my name, what is the value of this input now? It's Ahmad. If I was to put football, the value of this input is now football. So the value is simply what is inside of the input. So now let's go back to our code. And now we need to create a function. And you guys already know how to do this because we did it many times. And let's call our function submit data. Again, it can be whatever you want. As you guys seen from older examples, we used all these different types of functions and whatever custom name we came up with. So now I'm saying, hey, when someone goes inside this function, I want to get the value of whatever was inside of here, right? And how can we do that? How can we reference an element and read a property from it with document.getElementById, right? So we're saying document, which is going to search this entire document, and we're going to get the elements with the ID of, so the first one we need is first name. And then what is it that we said we want to read from this input? We want to read the value, right? So let's put value. So now let's read this line of code together just so we know what's happening. I'm saying, hey, when this JavaScript function is called or triggered, right? I want you to go to the document, which is everything, and get the elements with the ID of first name, which in this case is the elements, and I want you to read the value from that. And we said the value is what? Whatever is inside the box. So now, just to test to make sure that this is working, we want to put an alert, right? Just to throw a pop-up of what the value is. but also we need a way to trigger the function to happen, right? Because we said JavaScript has to be called. And the way we've been doing this in the past is with onClick. So let's put onClick, return this function. So I'm saying, hey, when someone clicks on this button, go to the function, and our function is simply just going to alert or put a pop-up of whatever was in the first name box. So let's go back to our site. Let's refresh. Let's put Ahmad here, and let's press submit data. And you see my website just read me or alerted me whatever it is that I put in the first box, which in this case was my first name. So let's go back to our code and add more to this alert, right? So we said, hey, I want you to alert the first name, but I also want you to alert the last name. So let's go ahead and get the last name. Document.GetElementbyId. And then what is the ID? The ID is last name. And then I want to get the value from that as well. So let's do value. Let's save. And let's go back to our code. Let's use a different name, John Doe, and press submit. And we see now we're alerting to the user both their first name and their last name. Now, some people may say, wait, why is John and Doe together? Why isn't there a space? Because if you were to look at our code, we don't put a space, right? We're saying first name value plus last name value. So it's literally just getting Ahmad or getting John and Doe and adding them or concatenating them together. If we wanted a space, then we have to put that in our code. We have to say plus space plus last name. So now if we save and refresh and again put whatever, we see now that we have a space. So now we want to do a little, something more. We don't want to just keep, writing, using alerts, right? We want to put the form or the data that the user gave us in like a nice little display. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to add something called a div at the bottom of our page. And a div is an element that literally is just a section or a place in our website that initially is blank, right? And then we can put whatever it is that we want inside of it. So when we first load our page, it's going to be nothing, right? But after we get the user's data, we want to put something in there. So let's go ahead and give our div an ID, and we're going to name it results div, right? And you can name it whatever you want. And basically what we're going to say is when someone clicks on the button, and we're going to go to this function, we're going to read all of the values that were in the box, and then after that, we're going to put inside of this div the person's answers, basically. So now instead of using alert, we're going to do something else. So what we want to do is we want to put things inside of the div. So the way we can do that is document.GetElementbyId, and then of course we put the ID of the div, right? And then we're going to use the property called inner HTML. And what that means is we're going to go to the inside of these two brackets or these two tags and put something inside of it. And the way we can do that is by assigning a value to that inner HTML. And what is the value that we're going to assign it? We're simply going to assign it the value of whatever was given to us inside the inputs. So now I'm saying, reading the code, that when someone clicks on the button, I want you to make the inside HTML or the thing inside of these divs the first name plus a space plus a last name, and then we can even say plus the favorite food. So let's put document.GetElementbyId, and let's put fav food because that was our ID, and the value of that. So now if we save and we go back to our code and refresh, let's go ahead and import our data. So Ahmad Hammoudeh, and favorite food is pizza, and submit. And we see inside of our div, which initially was blank, we added the text of the first name, the last name, and pizza. So in this very simple and short example, what we learned is how we can put the HTML element input onto our websites, how we can accept data or text from the user, and then third, when someone clicks on the button, we read the value from each one of those inputs, and then we display it inside of a div. And a div, again, is just a section of the code that's blank, but later on we can add whatever it is that we want inside of it. And that's what we did for today's lesson of inputs. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure you subscribe and stay tuned, as we're literally just getting started with learning HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. And I'll see you guys in next episode.